she's back. The queen is back. Her feet in the correct position. Her hands nowhere to be seen. Her keeping any main deck card from reaching any other point in the game, always happening. So yeah, I think Ash is back. Long story short, based on the new format, the new ban list, the new Photon Hypernova stuff, I have 5 of the best decks in the game, at least in my opinion, and in what I'm seeing most people speculating. And then we're going to talk about how Ash matches up against them, because in a new format, Ash has kind of disappeared last format because it just wasn't good enough versus tier. Into the new format, she's going to have a lot of new matchups, a lot of new ways to be able to be used, and I straight up think she's back. I think we might see her played in every main deck, or at least a very large percentage of main decks going forward yet again. So let's hit it. Number 1, Branded. This is probably the best matchup for Ash out of like the top tier decks, because they have a very clear option for you to hit. That's Branded Fusion. Even if they can do some plays aside from getting Ashed or not having access to Branded Fusion, usually they're just going to be a much lower ceiling than if they're able to resolve Branded Fusion. That card snowballs into so much advantage, and so being able to cut them off of that is very, very huge. It's a very clear point. It's a very clear choke point. And I don't even know if I call it a choke point, but just big impact card that you have to hit if you have Ash. And if you do, you're in a really good spot. So I love Ash against this matchup more than any of the other ones, but still like it in the other ones. So yeah, this is a really good one. Up next, Labyrinth. I do think Labyrinth is top tier next format, or at least right up against it. Maybe it's top of tier 2, but still in that consideration for top 5 decks. And yeah, this deck is kind of similar to Dinomorphia in that it has 2 power traps that get its engine online by summoning their monsters straight out of the deck. And so being able to Ash either of those to just keep their engine offline for a turn or 2 until you're able to kind of capitalize on it is really big. It is important to note that you do need to capitalize on it. If you Ash them so that they don't resolve Welcome Labyrinth, that is going to come back at some point, or they're going to be able to get another one at some point down the line. You have to capitalize on it. You have to run them through their traps to make sure they don't just have 3 back row plus a Welcome, because then it's going to be very hard to beat that deck. But if you can whittle through their traps and then they get Welcome Labyrinth and they just don't even have that many traps to work with, that's where you can still kind of shimmy around what the deck does. So that'll be a main focus for sure, but still not a bad matchup. I'd call this still like a 7 out of 10. They're all their best cards that get their engine going, ashable. So I'll take it. Moving on from there, Terra. Kind of similar to Branded in one regard, in which I think this deck has one clear best Ash target over the others. There's still some other stuff you can hit that's still similar to Branded too, but I do think there's one key target here, and I think that's Terra Theosis. It's a new spell card that like targets a Terra on field and summons another one from deck, I think with a different attribute, because they're all different attributes, so you just can't summon the same one. But yeah, it's a pretty powerful card, and as far as I know, they really struggle to do their full combo if they don't resolve Theosis. So even if all you have is Ash Blossom going second, just hitting Theosis is really going to put a ceiling on how far they're going to be able to go that turn. So it's very, very good. Even if they're able to play through it, I think with like using the additional normal summon card and being able to actually get the card you would have summoned off of Theosis out of the deck or into hand as well, they'd have to use like multiple cards in hand to play through that, in which case their follow-up's just not going to be nearly as good. So there's other ways it's impacting them even if they can play through it, and I will take that. I think it's probably closer to like a 7 out of 10, kind of like Labyrinth, not as powerful as Branded, because they do have ways where they can work around it, but overall still a plus card. I still think it's good in the matchup, good enough at the very least to keep in the main deck. Next matchup, Sprite. Sprite's worse, but Sprite's still good, man. The engine is consistent. The engine is clean. The engine can combine with a lot of other strategies, so they can lean kind of on those to still, be able to function really well. And I think, small hand traps were always like okay versus Sprite, because you were like, let me just hit Gigantic, and at least if I hit Gigantic, they're not going to get to Toad. Now, they may not be opting to go for Toad anymore anyway, but whatever they're pulling out of the deck is probably the most impactful level 2 that they can pull out of the deck. Whether it's Blue when they didn't have access to Blue, because when Blue resolves, he's like a +3 in a lot of scenarios. Or it's something like, depending on the deck they're splashed in, could be an engine piece. You know what I mean? When we were talking about the Toad variant, they were summoning Swap, and if you just kept them from getting the Swap, they wouldn't end on Toad. So even when Ash Blossom, one impermanence, kept them from getting to their most powerful endboard piece, which means their endboards would just be meh. All right. They do like 2 things, and it's fine. But they're also really small, so you can walk over their shit. It's very, very beatable. So I think it's fine in this matchup. The deck doesn't punish Ash as much anymore because they don't have Elf as a follow-up play, which is very nice. And it does the same thing. Tries to keep them off of like the big impactful summon from deck, usually. There may be other ways where you kind of have to hit them because it might be a clear way where they're going into red early with a starter, you know what I mean? And then you have to kind of keep the red from coming down or something. But either way, it's hitting something. It's lowering their ceiling. Their ceiling's already lowered because Elf is gone. I think it's good enough. It's probably more like a 6 out of 10. This might be the most underwhelming matchup, but I still think it's fine. I totally think it's fine. I don't think it's bad. I just think it's okay. And if their hand is just okay, it's going to be good. So, yeah, I think Sprite's another good one. And the last one here is Runic. I think Runic's back. Runic has no hits. The only hit you could argue is Elf gone, so that way Runic Sprite isn't as good, but still good. This is like the variant that used Sprite Elf the least. So yeah, like they're fine. This deck was gatekept by the Ishizu Shufflers, and now that they are, for the most part, as far as the format as a whole, they are pretty much not going to be very present in the format at all, I would expect. So this deck is going to be resolving its draws much more often. But you know what stops the draws? Ash Blossom. So I still think it's good. There's 2 main targets you're hitting in this deck. You're either hitting the Huggin from searching the field spell, or, which is actually pretty good because they discard his cost, and if they don't already have the field spell in hand, they're like losing a card in hand, and they're not getting the field spell, which is huge. And if they have access to the field spell, you can also keep them from resolving a draw. Now, it is important to note, the draw does not put the card, the Runic quick plays back into the deck as cost. It's as effect. So if you do Ash them, they stay engraved, which means they will have the draw live for a later turn. But if you're able to capitalize on it, we talked about this with like Labyrinth, you got to capitalize on it quickly. If you keep them off the draw 3, you're like, okay, we've limited their resources for this turn. I need to remove that field spell before they get to their next turn and just like top deck another quick play that's going to make them able to draw 3 and then get right back in the game, get to a grind, and Runic's very hard to beat in a grind. So you have to capitalize on it. But I do think if you're hitting Huggin, or if you imperm the Huggin and they were trying to bait you and they had it in hand anyway, then it's going to keep them at bay so that way you can get offensive, remove the field spell, and hopefully put yourself back in a position to kind of just beat them because they won't be able to grind that well. That's the goal. I still think it's good. I think it's closer to a 7, maybe even an 8 out of 10, because I think it's very clear points to hit, and just keeping them off the field spell is huge. You're just going to win a lot of duels versus Runic if you keep them off the field spell. And yeah, so I think that's actually a pretty solid one as well. But yeah, those are to me what I'm expecting to be 5 of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe just straight up the 5 best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Into the new format. I think Ash is at worst a 6 out of 10 versus Sprite and like up to a 9 out of 10 versus Branded. I really think this card is back because of the consistency it's going to have. It's live in every matchup. Going first, going second. It is live in every matchup. It is really, really going to put in work for you. I recommend messing around with it, putting it back into your deck because we are now in a more balanced format with decks, multiple decks on a similar playing field and not just one deck, or if that deck's not weak to Ash, then you can't really play it. So yeah, I think it's a really good time to be a fan of the feat. I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. You want to see more stuff from your boy down the line, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.